So it's so good to see so many friendly faces in the room today. For people who don't know me, my name is Joanna Czutkowna. I've been in the fashion industry for about 20 years now. 10 of those years I was based out in Shanghai. I've visited most production countries and I've spent most of my life inside of factories, seeing how things work on the ground and in real life. I've held senior positions for H&M in terms of like global innovation, product development and sustainability. And a couple of years ago, I started my own consultancy, and we work with some of the world's largest brands and sporting federations, as well as startups around sustainability. I'm also doing a PhD at Loughborough, specialising in circularity in football kit, and I co-authored the UEFA Circular Economy Guidelines apparel chapter. And I also host a podcast where we interview the key people who are changing the game in sports apparel and have contributed to different books and on different topics. But probably the key thing to know about me, I'm quite a practical person. I want to make sure that all the information that I give you today is something that you can go away and use. This is normally a 3-hour seminar that I'm trying to squeeze in just over 20 minutes. So I'm going to throw a lot of information at you, but feel free to ask questions at the end or follow up with me separately. But we're going to have a quick overview of what is circularity, an understanding of what the situation is within the apparel industry, and fundamentally, what can we do? I thought it's really important to start by actually saying, what is circularity? If we look at a term like sustainability, it's so overused now that it's kind of become meaningless. So I'm not going to read these definitions, but essentially I've condensed them into 5 key points for you. Circularity is really about reducing or eliminating waste, and that's through all part of the supply and value chain. So reducing the amount of energy that we take to make a product, reducing the cutting waste that's left on the table, and reducing the overproduction. And if we do have waste, it's about seeing that as a resource. How can we see it as a feedstock for other things? And ironically, circularity is about circulating products. It's about keeping products in use and extending their life cycle, and really retaining the product's highest value. It's not about recycling new products that we've just made, and it's not about having a load of clothes in the back of your wardrobe. It's about getting the products that you have and using them and allowing them to have multiple users. And really key, it's about decoupling economic growth, essentially from making physical products and from the impacts that it has within the environment. And so the good news is that circular business models are growing. They're predicted to be worth about 700 billion by 2030. So if you're looking to future-proof yourself, it's really important that you start thinking about circular business models. And circularity has a hierarchy, and this is something that we maybe don't talk about enough, but it's really looking at this reduce and reuse phase, because when we get to recycle, recover, and dispose, we've lost quite a lot of the value within the product. So it's seeing how we can implement these circular business models within this reuse phase. Because when I talk to stakeholders, I hear a lot of people trying to reduce their impact. I hear a lot of people talk about changing to more sustainable materials, but then it often seems to jump to recycling as the solution. And we kind of really miss out on the value in terms of these repair, refurbish, and remanufacture models. And we see it more with sports equipment, but we haven't really seen it so much with sports apparel. So there's a huge opportunity there. Then there's also an opportunity to really look at reuse models, so resale and rental. So companies like Decathlon are looking heavily into rental now, but also partnering with charity reuse organisations to make sure that you can extend this product life. And just some examples of kind of repurposing of product. A lot of people talk to me about race t-shirts. Well, these are 2 examples from a company called FC88, where they've partnered to actually upcycle these t-shirts into product that could be sold on that team's store. And then the one that I really like is this Grey Nichols glove. And essentially, they just use offcuts that they had in the factory to make this glove. And so they did a range, and all of the gloves were unique. And they got quite a lot of press and marketing out of this. So it just shows if we can be quite innovative in the way that we see waste, it has this dual benefit in terms of kind of gaining new customers and marketing. And then I really want to bust this myth about recycling, because I'm hearing a lot about companies recycling their product. Only 1% of used textiles are recycled into new clothing. Most of the product is downgraded into things like acoustic boards or insulation. And actually for sportswear, a lot of the recyclers, they're specialists at data destruction. So essentially what it means is if we've over ordered on a product and the brand says that we cannot resell that product and we have to destroy it, essentially these recyclers will shred that product and downgrade it into something like acoustic boards. So we are not making our old clothes into new clothes at any mass scale at the moment. And there's a few reasons for that. It can be complex in terms of if you have multiple fibers in one garment. Also, if you have anything like zips or buttons or patches on a garment, that can also inhibit recycling. In terms of the fashion industry, I can't overstate how damaging it is. I'm afraid I'm going to throw some very sad facts at you through the next kind of 10 minutes. But it's the fourth highest negative impact on the environment and on climate change. It's the third highest for water and land use. There are very significant cases of forced labour, unpaid wages, dangerous and poor working conditions within the supply chain, and also increasingly at the end of life of these products. And this disproportionately affects women because they are the ones who are making up the majority of the workforce. I think it's also really important to say that we should consider all the environmental impacts. So water pollution, chemical use, biodiversity loss, and not just the emissions. There is a big focus on emissions at the moment, but it's very energy and water intensive to grow some of the materials needed. If we look at the trends in terms of the fashion textile industry, textile production has doubled in 15 years. We're buying more than ever before, and that trend is set to continue. It's set to increase 63% by 2030. So overproduction and overconsumption is common. And when we look at the materials used, increasingly it's polyester for both fashion and sportswear. Polyester is a good material for sportswear because it has a lot of desirable properties. So it wicks well, it performs well, it's quite cheap. You can print it in many different colors. It's very durable. And it's also made of oil, which essentially is a plastic. So when it sheds microfibers, these contribute to microplastic pollution. It also doesn't biodegrade, and it contributes to the highest amount of greenhouse gas emissions of any single fiber. So quite a few years ago, we thought it was a very good idea to switch to recycled polyester, which came from plastic bottles. So 99% are coming from plastic bottles. However, recently, we've realized the impact of this, and there's a number of reasons. One is that legislation is coming. So a plastic bottle can easily be made back into a plastic bottle, and EU legislation is really going to push the bottle manufacturers to do this. So there's going to be less and less feedstock. There's also ethical questions about who is collecting these bottles, where are they collected from, and how much are they being paid. And we're also facing issues around if we're actually making new plastic bottles just to recycle them immediately to make polyester for garments. There are other materials that we can make our sportswear from, but for time I'm just going to focus on polyester. So if I think about the future, two things that are quite exciting. One is this football shirt from Puma. From next season, all Puma replica shirts are going to be made from textile to textile recycling. And this essentially means that they take pre-consumer waste, so the cutting waste, and they use that to make new material to make the shirts. Also, this one from H&M Move and Lanzatech, this is quite groundbreaking. They actually use partial carbon capture to be able to make polyester. So that's hugely exciting and quite sci-fi, and something that we hope will grow in the future. For many of you, supply chain will fall outside of your area of control. Often this is held by a brand, and I just wanted to show this slide just to show you how inherently complex the supply chain can be. Often there are traders or middlemen who sit in between these different aspects of the supply chain, and they keep it deliberately opaque for confidentiality reasons. Supply chains can span multiple countries, they can use subcontractors, and so it can be very difficult sometimes to find a one grain of truth that kind of goes throughout the entire supply chain, even if you have certifications and certificates. And this becomes important when we start to think about data collection. I think that it's really important that you consider the full life cycle of the materials that you use. And the key thing is to make sure that you're using the materials that are fit for purpose. Be careful when you start to compare materials. So if I compare polyester and cotton, cotton is a very thirsty crop. It uses a lot of water, it uses a lot of pesticides, it takes a lot of land to grow. If I was comparing that to making polyester, it doesn't need those things. However, if we look at the end of life, polyester doesn't biodegrade. It's very damaging. So just be very aware when you're looking at material comparisons and thinking about changing materials, fundamentally make sure that your material is fit for purpose, because there's nothing less sustainable than making the most perfect garment and it not performing. In terms of carbon calculations, the standard figure for a polyester t-shirt that we tend to look at is 5.5 kilos of CO2 per t-shirt. This will depend on where the t-shirt is made, how it's shipped. There's lots of different factors. A couple of other figures, if I look at Decathlon, who are doing a lot of work on this, they've got theirs down to 3.4. And the Japanese team for the Olympics, they've got theirs to 3.6 kilos. And that was a 34% reduction from the last Olympics. And what they've done to market that is actually print the CO2 impact of their garments inside their Olympics kit. So you've got to really kind of consider the impact of all of the emissions that are going into this product. If I look at a hoodie, for example, that's about 14 kilos. And then if I give you an example of the Paris Olympics, they have 45,000 volunteers. If we give them a t-shirt and a hoodie each, that equates to about 780,000 kilos of CO2 just from those two items. And actually, the volunteers get a full uniform. So the amount of damage and CO2 emissions in this is massive. If we look at the use phase, we can see actually we're wearing our clothes less than ever, and they're releasing more microfibers and essentially microplastics into our oceans. And we're giving them quite a short shelf life. We are donating them and sending them to charity, hoping that they'll be reused, but only about 30% are actually reused within the charity shop. The majority of them are actually sorted by grade and sent to third markets. So this is an image from Kantamanto Market in Ghana. And what happens is all of the clothes are baled up. So the vendors buy a bale, and this market receives 15 million items per week. And there's reports that up to 40% of everything in these bales is waste. And so whoever buys it, they have to find a way to dispose of that waste if they can't resell it on the market. And so this has led to their landfills being overfilled. It's led to their waterways being damaged. The government picks up 70,000 tons of waste from this market every day. And so, a lot of people are now calling this waste colonialism, where we're just essentially dumping our stuff in another country. And if we're not dumping it essentially legally, we might be dumping it illegally. So this is an image from the Atacama Desert in Chile. There were 39,000 tons of clothing dumped in this desert, because if they took it across the border, they would have to pay tariffs on it. It's now 60,000 tons, and this is actually that desert from space. So we've dumped enough clothes now in that desert that's actually visible from space. And the key takeaway here is that there is no away. When you say you're going to throw it away, there is no away in this. Everything that you're buying and procuring for your business, if it's made from polyester, is likely to be there, in 6 generations' time. And if we're not dumping it, potentially we're burning it. So every second, a truckload of textiles is incinerated or sent to landfill. So by the end of this call, about 3,000 truckloads, have been sent to landfill or incinerated. And that's a massive amount of value that's being lost every year because clothes are underused or underutilized. And I know for a lot of you on this call, you want to do something about this. I'm so pleased about the volume of people that we have on the call, but I know there's a lot of things that potentially inhibit you from taking action. There's a lot of conflicts of interest that do exist. There's silos between commercial departments and sustainability departments. If any of you are working with garment that you're selling as merch, it is very profitable. So how do you deal with the financial conflict of interest? Some of you have spoken to me about, the issues with supply relationships, who holds the power in that? Can you get visibility on your supply chains? The issues with sponsorship. If you end a sponsorship, what do you do with all that kit? You can't use it again unless you've already agreed. We've talked about data collection and accuracy, and often, everybody on this call is hugely busy. They have different priorities. We've all got limited resources and knowledge, and maybe it's just something that we'll put on the calendar, for another year. And I think it's really important to just think, what holds you back from taking action? Because change is coming. This is proposed legislation from the EU. It's not enforced in the UK, but the EU is leading in this area. So legislation is coming, which will force us to take action. A couple of key ones that I'll quickly mention. There's the eco design requirement. So you will be, forced to make products more environmentally friendly. Products will have a digital product passport so that you'll have to know where the product comes from and know details about it. There will be a ban on the destruction of unsold goods. So we can't just set things on fire anymore. We all have to think what to do with them. And this is where reuse organizations become very important. Extended producer responsibility is already enforced in France. And essentially, this will put a financial implication on a product to ensure that it has a successful end of life. And there's also going to be more legislation around due diligence within the supply chain to make sure that it's safe and ethical. So in terms of what you can do and what is in your control, I would start by really mapping the life cycle of that product and understand where you have control and where you have influence. If you're an NGB, it might be more around how you distribute the kit, how you use the kit, potentially an input into what it's made from. You might be able to influence the brand in terms of manufacture, but some things will be outside of your control. So it's really focusing on where can you make the most difference and have the most change. And everybody seems to think that change is very difficult and it's very expensive. So I wanted to give you at least 23 things that you can take away today and implement quite easily. I haven't got time to talk through all these today, but essentially a couple of them: talk to your athletes, understand what they need and what they want. Really rethink value. A lot of people talk about kind of the value in kind perks from brands. Think about, do you really need them? Is there a better way to kind of negotiate that contract? Talk about end of life responsibilities at the contract negotiation stage. This is going to be really important, especially if legislation comes. Educate your athletes, talk to them about the impact of clothing, advocate for change, potentially use design as a way to advocate, and eliminate silos within your organizations. Talk across sustainability, commercial, marketing departments. And I'll send these to Sarah and she can share these with you. But essentially, if there are 5 things that I want you to take away from this today, it's follow the R's. So look at that kind of circular hierarchy and follow the R's in order and do it strategically. Make it practical, make it fun, make sure it works for you and within your organization. Theory is great, but does it work in real life for you? Remember that there is no way. Everything that you're responsible for will have a legacy. So let's make it a good one. Have a look at what you can control and what you can influence and where can you have the most impact and focus on that. So that's been circularity in less than 20 minutes or about 20 minutes. I appreciate there might be some questions. I'll take them at the end. But if anybody wants to follow up and have more of a deep dive on this, I'm really happy to take questions on it. I really care about the subject and I think, everybody in the room can make a difference to it. So I'm more than happy to help.